It all started with the sound of metal being forced, that distinct screech of a lock giving way under pressure. You know that sound? It doesn't just echo in the air, it echoes inside you. It's the sound that tells you someone has crossed the line, stepped onto your turf, touched something that wasn't theirs. I remember standing frozen for a moment, my heart pounding harder than any engine I'd ever revved, because I knew exactly what that sound meant. Someone was trying to take my Jeep. Not just any Jeep. This wasn't a toy, a hobby, or some weekend mud-run vehicle. This machine carried weight, and not just in steel or horsepower. This Jeep was part of something bigger. Something far more dangerous than an HOA parking dispute. Now pause for a second and imagine this. You walk outside, your chest tight, the sun blinding, and you see her. The one face in the neighborhood that could make your blood pressure spike instantly. The woman everyone called Karen. Her reputation was legendary, loud, nosy, entitled, always convinced she was the self-appointed sheriff of the cul-de-sac. But today she wasn't just shouting across fences or filing complaints about trash cans. No. Today she had bolt cutters in hand. And not just resting in her grip, they were already sunk deep into the chain that guarded my Jeep, the lock sliced clean like butter. That's when everything slowed down. My blood roared in my ears. My Jeep sat there, hood glinting, tires gripping the earth, chained in place not because I feared neighbors, but because I knew who this vehicle really served. This wasn't just mine. It was registered to a very particular division of law enforcement. A Jeep embedded with technology, hidden reinforcements, and clearance that no average citizen had any right touching. But Karen didn't know that. All she saw was a violation. Something parked where she decided it shouldn't be. Something she thought she could claim jurisdiction over. I wish I could tell you I marched right up and stopped her, but the truth? For a moment I watched. I wanted to see just how far she was willing to go. And that, right there, was the hook into a story I knew would spiral out of control. Because once she snapped that lock, once she swung those doors open, she stepped not just into my Jeep, she stepped into a world she could never comprehend. And that's where the real nightmare began. Now here's the thing about people like Karen, they don't think. They act on impulse, on ego, on the desperate need to feel in charge. She strutted like she owned the asphalt beneath her feet, her voice sharp as she muttered about community rules and property rights. She even had the audacity to wave at a passing neighbor as if to say, "Look at me cleaning up this neighborhood." But while she was performing her little show, she was unknowingly committing a federal offense. Every cut she made, every step closer to that Jeep, was a step deeper into consequences she couldn't possibly imagine. And here's where I have to pull you in closer, because you need to feel what I felt in that moment. Picture this. Your chest is heavy, your fists clench, but instead of rushing forward, you let the silence grow. Because sometimes silence is deadlier than shouting. She swung the Jeep door open like it was some abandoned toy. Her eyes lit up when she sat inside, fingers gripping the wheel, her entitled smirk widening like she just won a prize. That's when my phone buzzed. One vibration, then another. A signal. A reminder. Because this Jeep wasn't just wired with GPS. It was wired to an entire police task force network. Every unauthorized entry triggered a silent alert. Cameras. Mics. Sensors. And now Karen wasn't just trespassing. She was on record. Let me stop right here for a second, because this is where most stories would end. This is where you'd expect the sirens to scream down the block and end it all. But no. That would have been too easy. What happened next was slower, darker, and 10 times more satisfying. She started the ignition. The sound roared through the street, a beast awakening. Neighbors turned heads, some in shock, some whispering, but no one dared step in. That's the thing about Karens, people either fear them or avoid them. But me? I leaned on the doorway watching, my pulse steady, because I knew the second she put her foot on that gas, she wasn't driving off with my Jeep. She was driving straight into a trap. And then came the first rehook, because this wasn't just about a stolen Jeep. This was about exposing an HOA's dirty power games, about showing the true face of someone who thought she was untouchable. And as her hands gripped the wheel, oblivious to the storm she'd unleashed, I realized something. Karen had just handed me every ounce of leverage I needed to bring down not only her, but the entire HOA. The Jeep rolled forward, heavy tires crushing gravel, her face flushed with a twisted kind of pride. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that this Jeep didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to the task force. And the moment she turned that corner, she wasn't in control. She was already being tracked, logged, and set up for something that would turn this neighborhood drama into a headline. And me? I followed. Not with rage. Not with fear. But with a calm so sharp it could cut glass. Because the best part about watching someone dig their own grave is knowing you don't even have to lift the shovel. The neighborhood always looked the same at dusk. Golden light dripping across trimmed lawns, shadows stretching across driveways, and that deceptive calm that made outsiders think it was just another quiet suburb. But that night the air wasn't calm. It was charged, thick, alive with a tension nobody else seemed to recognize. Everyone saw a Jeep rumbling down the road, but I knew better. Karen wasn't just joyriding. She had unknowingly become the bait in a game that was bigger than her, bigger than me, bigger than the entire HOA. I stayed back, close enough to watch, far enough to let her think she had won. She drove with that smug tilt of the chin, like a queen in a stolen carriage, waving to nobody but expecting applause anyway. She didn't know the Jeep was logging her every move. Each turn, each stop, every single word she muttered inside was being picked up by hidden microphones stitched into the dash. The task force had eyes on her now. And once they had eyes, they never looked away. But here's the part that still makes my chest tighten. I wasn't the only one watching. Across the street, blinds shifted. Curtains twitched. Neighbors peeked out, some curious, some fearful, some secretly pleased. Because Karen had made enemies. She always did. 4 years she'd bullied this community, sending fines, writing letters, humiliating families over grass length or trash bins left out a few minutes too long. She fed on control, and tonight she thought she had her biggest victory yet. But her victory was an illusion. And illusions, when they shatter, cut the deepest. The Jeep's tires crunched as she turned toward the exit road, the only path out of our secluded community. That's when the first silent alert hit my phone again. A flashing ping, unauthorized movement detected. It was followed by another, external surveillance engaged. The system wasn't just tracking her. It was sending live feeds to the task force servers. And here's the cruel twist. She thought she was escaping my reach when in reality she was stepping directly into theirs. I slipped into my truck, my hands steady on the wheel. I wasn't chasing her. No, this wasn't about racing or confrontation. This was about patience. Because when a predator thinks they're the hunter, the sweetest moment is revealing they were prey all along. Halfway down the road, I noticed her brake lights flare. She pulled over right under the shadow of the HOA's prized fountain. The one they bragged about in brochures, the one she'd fined kids for climbing on. She stepped out, slamming the door, her voice cutting through the air. "This Jeep is now under the HOA's possession," she shouted as if she were addressing a crowd. Her phone was out, the camera angled perfectly because of course she wanted proof. She wanted to parade this victory online, fuel for her constant battle against what she called rule breakers. What she didn't know, what made my blood turn to ice and fire at the same time, was that the Jeep wasn't just a vehicle. It carried files. Locked compartments. Classified equipment disguised as everyday tools. And if she dared pry too far, she wouldn't just be breaking HOA bylaws. She'd be breaking federal law. And this is where the rehook comes in, because right as she leaned into the back seat, pawing at the secured case wedged beneath the floor mat, I realized something horrifying. The task force wasn't going to swoop in and save me. They weren't going to stop her. They were watching to see how far she'd go. They wanted her to cross the line completely, to incriminate herself beyond question. And if she did, the fallout wouldn't just consume her. It would consume everyone connected, including me. I could have stopped her right there. I could have shouted, grabbed the case, ended it. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped back into the shadows, letting the silence swallow me whole. Because the truth was brutal. I wasn't just protecting my Jeep. I was protecting secrets far heavier than steel. And the task force? They wanted those secrets buried under Karen's arrogance. She tugged at the latch, cursed under her breath, her nails clawing at steel she couldn't open. Her frustration was delicious but dangerous. Every second she lingered was another second closer to disaster. Finally, she kicked the case, slammed the Jeep door and spun around, her phone light flashing as she aimed it toward my driveway, still muttering about illegal parking and community violations. That's when I made my move. I stepped into the street, the dim glow of the streetlight carving me out of the shadows. She froze. For the first time that night she saw me watching. Her smugness faltered, but only for a heartbeat. Then she sneered. "You can't stop me. The HOA has rights." And that's when I finally let the truth slip, my voice low, sharp, carrying enough weight to make her flinch. "That Jeep doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to the HOA. It doesn't even belong to me." I stepped closer, slow, deliberate. You just declared war on the wrong people. Her smirk wavered, her hand trembling slightly on the phone. But the Karen instinct was strong. She doubled down, barking about calling the police, about fines, about authority. She didn't realize the irony. She was threatening to call the very people who already had her in their crosshairs. And right then, as if on cue, a black SUV rolled past the end of the street. Windows tinted, lights dim. It didn't stop. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough. Her eyes flickered, a crack of uncertainty flashing across her face. She didn't know it yet, but she had just stepped into a storm far beyond HOA politics. And me? I wasn't sure if I was going to be caught in the downpour, or if I was the one holding the umbrella. The SUV vanished as quickly as it appeared, but the weight it left behind lingered like smoke after a fire. Karen's bravado cracked just enough for me to see the fear flicker beneath her eyes. She quickly masked it with another sneer, muttering about neighborhood watch and authorities on her side. But the truth was written across her face. She knew something was off. She just didn't know how deep it ran. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. The silence between us stretched, heavy and suffocating, until it was her nerves, not mine, that broke. She stomped back toward the Jeep, her phone still recording, but her voice had lost its swagger. The camera was her shield, her last defense. If she documented everything, she thought she'd be untouchable. But what she didn't understand was that she was already being documented, from angles and vantage points she couldn't even imagine. Because somewhere out there, beyond the suburban stillness, the task force was watching. Their servers buzzed. Their analysts leaned forward. Every word Karen spat, every movement she made, was being filed away under a case number she didn't even know existed. And here's the cruel irony. Karen thought this was about a Jeep, about an HOA rule, about some imaginary power struggle on her cul-de-sac throne. But the Jeep was never the real story. It was the bait, the test, the doorway to something far darker, the HOA's hidden hand in places it had no right to be. You see, what the neighbors never knew, what even Karen herself didn't know, was that the HOA wasn't just about lawn care and parking spaces. They'd been funneling money, bending rules, disguising shady deals under maintenance fees and community improvements. And the task force had been circling for months, waiting for someone reckless enough to give them a reason to act. Karen, in all her arrogance, had just kicked that door wide open. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, watching the trap close. She climbed back into the Jeep, still muttering about how this vehicle will be impounded. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than before, knuckles pale, her confidence crumbling but refusing to die. She turned the key again, the engine roaring to life, and pulled away from the fountain. This time she wasn't driving for show. She was fleeing. I followed at a distance, headlights off, my breath slow and steady. My phone vibrated again, a new alert flashing across the screen. Phase 2 initiated. I didn't need to read the rest. I already knew what it meant. The task force was tightening their net. We reached the edge of the neighborhood, where the manicured lawns ended and the cracked back roads began. That's when the second rehook hit, because the road wasn't empty anymore. 2 black SUVs were parked on either side, engines off, lights dim. Karen slowed, her bravado slipping into full-blown panic. She fumbled with her phone, dialing furiously, her voice sharp with desperation as she shouted into the receiver, "They're trying to steal my car. Get the police." But the irony was cruel and perfect. The police weren't coming for me. They were coming for her. The SUVs pulled forward, blocking the road. Karen slammed the brakes, her Jeep skidding slightly on the gravel. She screamed through the windshield, waving her arms, demanding they move. But those tinted windows never rolled down. No words were exchanged. The silence itself was the answer. I stayed back, hidden in the shadow of a tree line, watching. My phone buzzed again, another update, observation mode active. The task force wasn't swooping in. They weren't rescuing me. They wanted to see how she'd react, how far she'd push, what evidence she'd gift them on a silver platter. She threw the Jeep into reverse, spinning it around, tires spitting dirt, her screams echoing down the road. She wasn't in control anymore. She was trapped in a cage with invisible walls, walls built by her own arrogance and the HOA's corruption. And here's where things twisted even darker. As she sped back into the neighborhood, the Jeep's dash lit up. A small red light blinked, something she didn't notice but I did. The task force had activated a silent lockdown. The Jeep was no longer hers to drive. With a simple signal they could cut the engine, freeze the locks, and trap her inside. But they didn't. Not yet. They wanted her to feel the illusion of freedom just long enough to expose every angle of the HOA's rot. She swerved into the clubhouse parking lot, slamming the brakes, her phone glued to her ear. And that's when it happened, the moment that pulled me deeper than I'd ever expected. Because out of the clubhouse doors came two men I recognized instantly. Not neighbors. Not board members. Not random bystanders. These were the HOA's real enforcers, the ones who never showed up to meetings, the ones who pulled the strings in the shadows. Karen ran to them, waving wildly, her voice cracking as she shouted, "I secured the Jeep. We can finally take it as evidence." Evidence. That word stuck to me like a thorn. Evidence of what? Evidence of who? The Jeep wasn't HOA business. It was task force business. And yet, here she was, delivering it straight into their hands. The two men didn't smile. They didn't cheer. They simply nodded, exchanged a glance, and one of them whispered something into his phone. A coded phrase, clipped in fast like he wasn't reporting to Karen, but to someone else entirely. And that's when it hit me. Karen wasn't the mastermind. She was the pawn. The HOA wasn't just power-hungry, they were entangled in something far deeper, something that reached far beyond neighborhood politics. My phone buzzed again, the message brief and chilling, "Do not intervene." But as I stood there, hidden in the shadows, watching Karen hand over the Jeep to men who had no business touching it, I realized something terrifying. If I didn't intervene now, I might not get another chance. And if I did intervene, I might be standing against forces even the task force wasn't ready to confront. That was the razor's edge I balanced on. Either way, blood was about to be spilled, metaphorical or real. And the HOA's mask was about to shatter for everyone to see. The night had teeth. That's the only way I can describe it. The kind of night where the silence feels like it's watching you, waiting to bite if you make the wrong move. Karen stood in the parking lot, wild-eyed, clutching her phone like a lifeline as she barked orders into the void. The two HOA men loomed beside her, shadows cut sharp by the dim glow of the clubhouse lamps. My Jeep sat between them, engine humming low, the blinking red light on the dash pulsing like a heartbeat. From where I stood, hidden just beyond the tree line, it was clear. This wasn't about an HOA rule violation. This was a handoff. A transaction. Karen had thought she was enforcing community rules, but in truth she'd become a delivery girl for something much bigger, and much darker. The taller of the two men leaned into the Jeep, his hand disappearing beneath the seat. He wasn't looking for parking stickers. He was looking for the case. The case the task force had embedded inside, bait designed to smoke out whoever the HOA was funneling information to. And now, right in front of my eyes, the trap was about to snap shut. My phone buzzed, a single-line message glowing on the screen. Final phase. Stand down. But my gut twisted. Stand down? While Karen strutted like she'd just scored her biggest win. While these men pawed at task force property like it was theirs to claim. My fists clenched so tight the leather of my gloves groaned. I'd followed the rules, I'd obeyed the silence, but I couldn't shake the thought. What if the task force didn't plan on saving me? What if I was just as disposable as Karen? The shorter man finally pulled the case into the open. Sleek, black, reinforced steel with a lock that wasn't meant to be broken outside of federal clearance. Karen's smug laugh split the air. Told you. This'll prove everything. He's been hiding things in that Jeep for months. The HOA will finally expose him. Expose me? My jaw tightened. That was the story they'd spin, that I was the villain, the rule breaker, the criminal. Karen wasn't just a pawn. She was a weapon. And she didn't even realize the task force wasn't here to protect her. They were here to watch the weapon misfire. I stepped forward, gravel crunching under my boots. Her head snapped toward me, eyes wide before narrowing into that familiar sneer. "You're finished," she shouted, waving the phone like a dagger. "Everyone will know what you've been hiding." The taller man straightened, the case still in his grip. His gaze locked onto mine, calm and cold. He wasn't HOA muscle. He was something else. Something trained. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just facing corruption. I was staring at operatives embedded in my own backyard. The re-hook slammed like thunder. The HOA wasn't just corrupt. They were a pipeline. A local mask for a much bigger machine. And Karen had just handed them the key. I raised my hand slowly, my voice cutting through the night like a blade. "That case doesn't belong to you. Put it down." Karen cackled, her laugh high and shrill. It doesn't belong to you either. This is evidence. Evidence of everything you've done against this neighborhood. You think you're above the rules, but now we've got proof. She didn't see it. She couldn't. She was blind to the reality that the so-called evidence she bragged about was a trap she had sprung herself. The taller man's lips twitched, the faintest smirk breaking through. He lifted the case slightly, testing its weight. Then, with a subtle nod to his partner, he moved toward their SUV. That was the moment my phone lit up again. One word. One command. Now. The red light on the Jeep's dash stopped blinking. It turned solid. And in an instant the engine died. The locks clicked shut. The air itself seemed to shift. Hidden compartments inside the Jeep hissed open, revealing cameras, scanners, transmitters, all blinking alive. The entire scene lit up like a stage, every move captured, every word recorded. Karen froze, her phone slipping from her fingers. The two men stiffened, realizing too late they weren't stealing anything. They were being exposed. And then, from the shadows, the task force emerged. Black-clad figures, silent, efficient, surrounding the lot with the precision of predators closing in on prey. No sirens. No shouting. Just the heavy inevitability of control reclaiming what was theirs. Karen screamed, pointing at me. It was him. He's the criminal. Arrest him. But no one even looked my way. They weren't here for me. They were here for the men she served without even knowing it. Hands yanked them away from the Jeep, slammed them against the SUV, steel cuffs clicking into place. The case was ripped from their grip, sealed in task force hands once more. And Karen? She stood there trembling, her voice cracking as she shrieked about HOA rights, bylaws, authority. She didn't understand those words meant nothing now. She wasn't a queen. She wasn't even a pawn. She was a footnote in a case file that would bury the HOA deeper than any fine or rule violation ever could. One agent stepped toward her, calm and cold. "Ma'am, you've interfered with federal property. You will be escorted for questioning." Her screams split the night, high and shrill, echoing down the empty street. But no one came to her aid. Not the neighbors. Not the HOA board. No one. She was alone. And for the first time she realized her crown was made of paper. As they pulled her toward the SUV, her eyes locked on mine. Hatred burned there, mixed with confusion, fear, and something she'd never admit, regret. Because deep down she finally understood. She hadn't just messed with a Jeep. She had trespassed into a world that would chew her up and spit her out. The task force didn't speak to me. They didn't need to. Their silence was the loudest message of all. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't even innocent. I was just useful. And tonight, my usefulness had come to an end. The SUVs pulled away, engines low, fading into the night until only the hum of crickets and the rustle of leaves remained. The clubhouse stood silent. The Jeep sat still, waiting, its secrets reclaimed, its purpose fulfilled. I walked to it slowly, brushing my hand along the hood. Cold now. Just metal. Just steel. But I knew better. This machine wasn't mine. It never really had been. It belonged to something bigger, something that didn't care about lawns, driveways, or HOA fines. And as I stood there under the dim glow of the street light, the final truth settled in my chest like a stone. Karen had thought she was the hunter. The HOA thought they were the kings. But in the end they were all just pawns. And the real game? It had only just begun. If you want more jaw-dropping stories of HOA madness and neighborhood battles, smash that like button, subscribe to HOA Warzone, and join the fight, because the next Warzone might be right outside your door.